As we talked about yesterday, stats are crucial, and they also are only as good, A, as the numbers, and B, as the relevance they have to the question you're trying to answer. I think Judith Gans said it, you know, are we asking the question of, are immigrants responsible for the major costs of welfare? Are we asking the question of, do many immigrants in Arizona use welfare? I would add, are we asking the question, do the children of immigrants disproportionately use welfare? And then you might extend it, as she pointed out, to what extent do the children in poor families or children who go to schools with few resources end up using social services? So clearly there are a lot of different questions you can ask, and how you use the data and what you're looking for will depend on that. I think something else that came away yesterday in terms of the numbers is that they're great and they're important for explaining some theories on economics and immigration, but a lot of those are still theories, and there's a lot of dispute that continues to go around. We saw that between Ron Hira and Giovanni Perry, and I think Ron Hira's numbers were really interesting, and Giovanni Perry has a study that he recommended that uses many of those similar numbers and comes to a different conclusion, which we will put up on the website so you guys can take a look at. But I hope that you also came away with the notion that these people are still arguing about it amongst themselves. So we can and we should challenge them and ask them, and not consider the economic and the numbers as manna from heaven, nor the economist as God. So that said, numbers are also very useful for telling the story and really driving it home. And I think anyone who's done immigration coverage has not worked very long if they haven't come across eventually TRAC. TRAC is a transactional records access clearinghouse. It has a tremendous amount of information that is extremely useful if you cover this issue. And today we have the good fortune of having David Burnham, who is going to speak about this database which he has created. He's a former New York Times reporter, Polk Award winner, CBS, Newsweek veteran, pretty much has won almost every award. So we're very lucky to have him here today to explain his work. And along with him, we also are very lucky to have Dianne Solás, veteran reporter from the Dallas Morning News, who's covered so many different immigration stories, Mexican woman seeking asylum, fleeing SETA, all sorts of issues for more than 2 decades, former Wall Street Journal reporter, and also a Nieman Fellow. Thank you so much.
Good morning. TRAC was started 25 years ago by Susan Long and myself. She had helped me out on an investigative book on the IRS, providing me numbers. Sue had begun getting data out of the IRS in 1972. The legal battle to get that eventually involved 3 suits under the FOIA and ended only a couple of years ago. And Sue and I, she helped me out, and I think it was a joint idea. There ought to be an organization to provide newspaper people and public interest groups and the public and Congress with concrete information about what is going on. Is the government achieving its stated goals? And if not, why not? That's sort of the basic rule that we started with. And it has involved, and after 4 or 5 years, Sue and I decided we ought to include immigration in this. We've done a lot of stuff in the IRS. That said, from then on, Sue is the real demon genius who's gotten into the incredibly complex world of looking at the immigration subject. It is just, everybody, including Danna, says it's too complicated. And it really is, because you've got criminal enforcement, you've got administrative enforcement, you've got different courts and all that. So it's a bear to understand and deal with. But Sue has done a remarkable job, I think, in doing this. As you see on the screen, we have stuff on other agencies. And we have lots of different mechanisms for moving around, and everybody, you can call me and I will help out. This is a very simple thing at the top, which is called Data Interpreter. And I won't explain it because you're watching me do this. I went to fiscal year and prosecutions, and there it comes up. And by setting variables, you can go to different things. I think today our interest is in immigration. Come on. And okay, so, no, sorry, wrong one. Oop. Is it going?
On the blue instead of.
Okay, that is what I thought I had done already. What? Okay, sorry. I thought we got in there a minute ago.
So you wanted to.
Program?
Yeah.
Okay, now hit immigration. Okay, D, Burnham. Sorry, gang. 8722. I thought that came up. DB Burnham. Now let's see, is it working? Yeah, there it is.
So what about if people don't have a password? How do you sign up for it?
Well, this particular thing is open to the public, essentially. A lot of the searches in this data interpreter, you don't need a password. If it asks you for it, there may be, and you make an intricate inquiry, there may be a $2.25 charge for getting to it. So it's
Worth every penny. You can't say that, but I'll say that for him.
okay. Now how do I get it to go up here? Whoops. Oh, wait a minute. I see. There it is. As you know, the Republicans all over the country have been saying that Obama's not enforcing the immigration laws. And the sheer data, it is overwhelming, this jump. As you can see, prosecutions have gone from 10,000 or something to, well, it's a tenfold increase in this period. And that, of course, is mostly driven by doubling the size of ICE, yes?
Did you say tenfold in the?
Yes.
Jesus.
Let's just make sure we have everybody on board, David. Just
Oh.
tell us what you did. Where did you just go?
Scroll down on the same report.
Well, you want to see the report?
No, I just want you to explain where you went and what it is that we're seeing.
Okay, I'm sorry.
How many, I just want to ask.
Let me back
how
up
many
here.
people
That's-
know TRAC? How many
Exactly,
people
let's
are
ask-
at all familiar with TRAC? Or rather, let's raise your hand if you don't know TRAC at all, if you've never seen it before. Oh, okay.
So we need to
So-
really start
Okay.
from the beginning.
Start back at
So-
the beginning.
Yes.
Okay,
It's quite navigatable, but just to have that in mind.
okay. So this is the home page. And there's an immigration icon that I will go to briefly. I've decided to go to what is called Data Interpreter. And in Data Interpreter, you are able to look at civil or criminal data. And you can look at just the latest month by month or fiscal year. And fiscal year is what I wanted to look at. And then I want to look at prosecutions. So I clicked on that. And so I wanted to look at various program categories. There are 68 of them, but I went to a broader one, which, notice you can do civil rights and all of that. And I clicked on immigration. And so this is all the prosecutions by fiscal year, year by year. And the most recent, the almost ending fiscal year data that we have is 146,000 prosecutions. And then we want to look at 83 of them, you see more than half, 146 prosecutions throughout the federal government, and well over half of them are immigration prosecutions.
Fiscal year to date, does that mean just since October 1st?
No, we're looking at this annual, we're looking at this on an annual basis. And
It's fiscal year 2013, which
Right.
ended September 30th.
So of all the prosecutions for the fiscal year of the 140,000,
3,000, more
you're
than,
saying more than half were,
yes,
of all federal prosecutions?
yes.
More than half were immigration related?
Mhm. And this report, I keep losing the, how do I scroll down? Where is it?
Slide bar on the right side.
It's not showing. Come here, I'm sorry.
Okay, do you want to drive
Yeah,
for?
I'm not.
No, I'll drive.
Is that something you could look up and point out, and I could move things through,
What do you want? Okay,
and you point up
okay,
there?
okay.
Is that gonna
Yeah,
help?
sure,
Yep.
let's do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Also, I want to make sure, are you all in the wireless here? Did you know how to get
Can you
in?
scroll up?
It's not working
Uh,
right
You
now, but I think
choose
it's
the
might-
Harvard
Oh.
Guest account, not the Harvard account. Harvard Guest, open your browser and then just accept.
Okay.
Do you want to point out stuff over there, or do you?
Well, I wanted to move on.
Okay.
So, we are looking at
Just
the,
wait, David, for a second. So, is everybody on the internet? If you go to the immigration page, you have the link to this and all the other resources that we're going to be using today. So nieman.harvard.edu/immigration that I also sent you last night. So is everybody on the TRAC page?
We're on this table is on that page, but we're not on because we're not on that report.
Okay,
So it says if you're a subscriber, please log on, so.
okay. Thank
okay,
you.
we're gonna find, we'll be in totally free land in a moment. This is $2.25. No sense getting into it now.
Okay, good.
So this shows this incredible increase. And what always bothered me about the reporters when Governor Perry in Texas says Obama's not enforcing the law, they don't put in the next paragraph. However, immigration enforcement's gone up 10 times in the last X years. And the reporters don't put in those little things that are, and this data, mind you, is based on case-by-case information obtained from the Executive Office of U.S. Attorneys of the Justice Department. And we get this now after a 20-year fight in federal court, including 3 suits. We now get this on a monthly basis. Very timely, and we keep posting and adding it all the time.
But we should clarify that this is criminal prosecutions
Yes.
of immigration violations, not the civil deportation proceedings that then result in removal, which we're dealing with.
We'll
So
go,
it's again apples and oranges
go
in
to
how it's
this.
written.
we'll go to this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. One is, when you say criminal prosecutions, is that for the crime being an immigration-related crime
Yes.
Yes,
versus,
yes.
okay. And does the government not publish this data like at the end of the year, give you these aggregate numbers?
No, they don't. They put out an annual report a couple of years afterwards, and we get this on a monthly basis. And their data, as you see when we get into this a little further, you can look at prosecutions, you can look at convictions, you can look at percentage of referrals that are declined by the government, percentage that go forward.
Can you give some examples of what you're talking about with criminal prosecutions, immigration related?
Well, the government has a system for categorizing. They have several systems for categorizing the information. And David Burnham is indicted for money laundering, but the government decides it's really immigration money laundering. And so they put you in that category. And
Yeah,
so,
Can I give an example? Maybe I can help you with that. So David Burnham has entered the United States illegally after having previously been deported. He can either be he can be criminally prosecuted, he can be civilly put in deportation proceedings, or both. The Obama administration has really ramped up the criminal prosecutions, which is what we were talking about yesterday about, and I think people will talk about a little bit more today, how Crim-Im is growing because perhaps David Burnham's only criminal offense is related to his entry into the United States illegally. So he's a criminal alien once he's been prosecuted criminally for that charge, and will then be removed as a criminal alien. But really, his only crime is having, and the same facts are both a basis for a criminal prosecution and the civil removal. And that's where numbers start getting muddled, and theory, and it starts getting difficult to cover.
No, thank you.
A criminal prosecution would still go in front of you in an administrative.
no,
No,
It wouldn't
Federal
be a
District
criminal
Court.
prosecution. Okay,
That's what we're just talking federal district court here.
got it.
I scrolled down and you can see this, they have a breakdown on the immigration charges, the immigration category by criminal charges. And not surprisingly, 1325 and 1326 are at the top.
that's entry without inspection or re-entry after having been previously deported. Those are tried in U.S. District Court. They are a criminal charge. They are not heard by immigration courts unless those individuals are referred by DHS after their criminal prosecution to an immigration judge.
Now, going back, I'm going to stay on criminal, and I'm going to, let me back up one more step here.
Just to clarify, if they were convicted for reentry, and it's, I think, a minimum of 5 years, they would spend 5 years in federal prison, many of which have been designed specifically now for immigrants, and then they would then be ordered deported, and if they appealed, or for any other reason, then that's when they would come before Judge Marks, after their sentence, after serving the time.
So
Well, after serving their time, they're referred to immigration court
I'm
for
being
the
Shanghai here.
proceedings.
That's okay.
Sometimes,
Okay, that's good.
It's important.
That's
yeah,
good.
sometimes while they're incarcerated, immigration judges are sent to certain criminal facilities under what's called the criminal alien program to try to shorten the time of incarceration. They may have their hearing before an immigration judge while they are still in criminal state or federal custody in order so that they have a civil deportation order ready, or removal as it's called, as well as their criminal conviction, and while they're serving their time, we give them a civil removal order so that then when they finish serving their time, they can be shipped out, as they say.
Okay, now I'm going to go back to the broad program category, immigration, and but I want to look in one district. Whoops, how did that happen? I want to look at Arizona. So the same data will now come up in Arizona. So if you're a reporter in Arizona or California or Florida, whatever, you can, any district, you will get that data that we ordered. So data interpreter is a way to, come on machine, is a way to sort of take a quick look at what's going on. Come on. Okay, double fingers. And you see Arizona is a similar sort of pattern, except it's dropped off. How come? What's going on? Is the staff been reduced? Is the prosecutor there decided not to do less on immigration? But you have the actual numbers.
And I might add a very user-friendly explanation. The text is very helpful in these reports, I find.
Okay, so that's data interpreter. Now I'm going to go to the immigration icon. I am going to, and you will see that there are a lot of ways to go in here. I recommend going to reports and bulletins. Over the years, we've written a lot of reports and bulletins. We started, I think it's 2007 on immigration. And the first is about DHS enforcement. You remember the head of ICE has been bragging about how we're moving, going after the criminals, and we're not going after just the regular folks. So this is a report we put up in just a month or so ago, and it turns out that an overwhelming majority of the people who get detainers have no crime at all, have nothing. This is a great example of what an agency says and what it does, and they are very different. And it's, I mean, it's the level of untruthfulness here is really quite interesting. And when we quote John Morton, we then put in the actual data and showing that, let's see here, see, most are none, no criminal offense at all, convicted of nothing. A few traffic offenses and a tiny handful of serious offenses. So the rhetoric of the Obama administration here is false. And the come on, baby. There we go. This business of agencies talking one game and living another, one of our first reports, you see this is 2007, is the rhetoric and the reality. And Julie Myers was the head of ICE then, and she had been testifying in Congress and speeches and everything. What we are doing is terrorism. We're going after terrorism, terrorism, terrorism. And that's good for getting big appropriations. And it's good after the 9/11, it makes you feel good. And so what were they doing? We, under the FOIA, got from the immigration court 700,000 matters that have been referred to the immigration court from ICE. And when they refer a matter into the immigration court, they can add a tag on it of different, so a criminal charge, though there's no actual charges involved. And as you see, terrorism was 12 out of 700,000. 12. Now this is, there's some, you could argue, there are certain points you could argue with this, but this is an amazing example of an agency not saying what it's doing. And as you see, there were 414 national security. Now, criminal enforcement, come on, I'll get the knack at this. I've never used this particular mouse before. Criminal enforcement, here's Southern District of Texas. We looked at this. You have the number of cases, the percent change from the previous years, 9% up, percent from 27% from 5 years ago, and 385%. So this is all calculated in these reports. These texts, by the way, many of these texts are written by machine. Programmers have worked out, so when the new data comes in each month, the data is shoved into the machine, and these reports and graphs are prepared, many of them, not all of them. But Danna, we want to look at the immigration courts, which is an entirely different, come on. The immigration courts, one of the first stories we did was about asylum disparities among the judges, which caused the court a fit. And that's a long time ago. And what it showed was that, what we're saying is in city after city, judges, side by side, one judge would grant asylum in a large number of cases, another would not do so. And the interesting thing is the court, and Danna can talk to this, had never looked at this previously. It is not a lawyer's way of thinking. And I want to go into that a little bit, how we can do this. This disparity is based looking at a judge and each of whom has more than, I've forgotten, we do this in other areas, has 100 or more cases. The courts claim that these cases are assigned on a random basis. And I think, Danna, they are in fact assigned on a random basis. So, boom. There's no judge shopping. But if you end up before Judge Danna, she's hell on wheels, and the chances, good chance you're not going to get asylum. If you end up, and it will be deported. If you end up before Judge Burnham, who's a good guy, as you all know, I'm not. So the facts in the case are often irrelevant. Now, there's a real hard challenge to getting to the facts of the cases Danna suggested. The huge caseloads, many of the people have no lawyers. There's very often very little evidence, whatever. But the hard data year after year shows this disparity. The court actually responded somewhat. They said, okay, we're going to get more judges, we're going to get clerks, we're going to deal with this problem. They were ashamed. This data, I think, helped them focus on that. But there was a Judge Posner who was in the Court of Appeals in Chicago, and he had sent down about 8 different courts, just whacking the executive office and whacking and whacking. And this double whammy hit Mr. Gonzalez. And Gonzalez actually he was shamed. He was shamed. It really worked. And for a while, actually, we did a second study and it found that disparities had gone down.
Well, you have a report in there, I think in about 2008, about the 22 initiatives that Alberto Gonzalez, as Attorney General at the time, came up with after studying those phenomena and the recommendations to improve the court. And I think it's 2008, if I'm right, that you said, okay, 2 years later after this report came out, where's the progress on the court improvement measures, I think might be what it's called.
Yeah.
I think that's a worthwhile report to read.
We have in the immigration court a way of looking up any district or any judge by name. When we started doing this, the EOIR, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, said, we'd prefer you not to use names. But, I nodded and said, I was on the phone, actually, and I nodded and said, glad to hear you. And we put up names. We've done exactly the same thing on this site. If you go to another area, you see we did this in the administrative law judges in the Social Security Administration. And we have done this in the criminal court, federal.
Why don't you use me as an example? Why don't you pull up my asylum statistics?
Okay.
I'm giving you permission to out me
Thank you, Donna.
for the purposes of education. Well, I know you're gonna go do it afterwards anyway. So. I know, again, after it's too small to read.
Let's just go slowly though, explain what you're doing,
Oh,
David.
okay.
So,
I did a pull down to the city where Danna is, San Francisco. And these are the judges in San Francisco. And we want the latest report. Where are you, Danna?
Under D for Danna.
No.
Mark's
Mark's.
right
In the middle.
Yeah, there we are.
There we go.
And there's a report on Danna. And it shows that her rate, she's going soft. And
I haven't looked at it recently, so I don't know. I thought I was.
I mean, it's really quite interesting, isn't it? She's really changed. And you can see where Danna stands in relation to the other judges in San Francisco and in the U.S., the judges in the U.S. And, you know, reporters around, and I think attorneys have found this useful. They can't judge shop, but you might be able to advise your client. Not that many of these people don't have an attorney, but you could advise your client, oh, she's a softie, don't worry about it. Or, you know, whatever. And you would change your strategy. Could you change your, is that right? The attorney could maybe, would that be helpful information?
I have a lot of reasons why looking at these statistics is just like the economics. It's only one piece of a very
Yep.
complicated puzzle. One thing I do want to point out though about the statistics is you'll see that like, it says up there, I'm one of 271 individual immigration judges. That's because the core, it's not that we were all on board at the same time. So that's why those numbers are higher. That includes people that have left and been replaced, perhaps.
Yeah, well,
during
this
that
covers 2007 to 2012,
2012.
multiple years. And we keep updating these.
Right.
On a regular
But I do
basis.
know people look at that, and what can often be interesting is there's a way to look at how I rate with the other judges in my court only, as opposed to how I rate with other
What-
judges across the country. And
Well,
I
that's
could spend
there.
hours talking about the why, and I will talk to you guys about that.
Th-
Off the
th-
record
This
best.
is here. Judge Danna is there, and Marks is there, and those are the judges in San Francisco in the middle column.
I'm a great judge to compare it to.
let's go for it.
Dan, did you want to, Diane, go ahead. Dan, did you want to?
Oh, yeah, David, so, so San Francisco is just slightly more generous with asylum seekers than the US medium, is that what I am seeing in the column?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's slightly tougher, isn't it? San Francisco's slightly tougher than the national average, and the judge in question is
Okay,
Less
slightly
tough.
less tough.
Slightly tougher.
In line with.
And down below at the bottom, you see it has the nationality of the cases in San Francisco. And they, of course, varies very much.
Which can affect the grant or denial rate.
Yes.
Right.
And, you know, in New York South or in New York City, it's a large concentration of Chinese people for some reason that I don't understand. Miami is entirely different. But we only compare the judges in a single district. So you are really kind of looking at apples and apples. And because of what is known as the law of large numbers, there shouldn't be any disparities. There should be almost no disparities. And the fact that there are, I think goes to questions of training, who's selected, and but Dan, why are there the
There
variables?
is an in-depth law review article called Refugee Roulette. Great title, huh? By Georgetown and Stanford law professors. They did an initial study that was very similar, and then they've done, I think, an update too. I don't remember the exact name of it. There are so many variables, I think it's difficult for it to be statistically accurate. Are the people represented? What are the nationalities? Are those kind of what we call slam dunks? Someone who converted from Islam and comes from Iran. You're gonna find very few judges across the country that are gonna find that controversial. The evidence is pretty overwhelming. If this person brings in their baptismal certificate, right? That's gonna be an easy one. As we discussed yesterday, if you have something relating to a cutting-edge legal theory, like gender violence or years ago, sexual orientation as a particular social group was not as well defined. Now the case law has evolved and it's also becoming a slam dunk. I mean, the law evolves, so that's part of it. You do have different judicial philosophies, different rates of representation. And also, I think no one has ever studied how much variation there is in other decision-making contexts, such as why were the criminal sentencing guidelines implemented? Because there was a perception that people weren't uniform enough. Why do juries do what they want and in a jury trial, right? Even though an outside observer, objectively speaking, might say, look, that wasn't the right decision. So it takes a really deep sociological study, I think, of judging in the judicial system to really put it in the proper context. But that said, the data is there.
The data is there, and there's great things to ask the defense attorneys in each city, to ask the interest groups in each city what is their experience. And it's our belief, and I think Danna would agree with me, this has never been looked at by the courts. And the awareness that your neighbor is hell on wheels and you aren't raises questions, and there must be hallway conversations about how come and what's going on. This self-awareness, there can be some correction.
Well, where this is groundbreaking is that in any kind of judging, in any kind of field, there's been very little work done. Because of course, when this came out, we started scrambling for going, well, how do we compare to other judges in other situations? And there's not a lot of research and study done. So we're kind of the guinea pigs, and you know, it's kind of hot on the stove sometimes, but
what we did,
as David said, it's true that the focus of attention did help us get some improved resources and reform and attention from the department that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
and on track, you see there you can find a similar report on the ALJs in the Social Security Administration. Same kind of disparity. It's an area that I think reporters have been really have just ignored, the power of administrative judges and administrative law judges. And the agencies don't look at it, and I don't think the press has looked at it very well. So I think it's important. Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think actually a colleague of mine at the Journal did a story looking at disability judges and how there was profiled one in West Virginia, I think, who was basically granted might have been using this data, every disability case
Well,
that came
we
forward.
did all the judges a couple of years ago, and it was amazing. The head of the Social Security Administration was not happy. He put out 2 press releases denouncing us and went to the university and said we should be drummed out of the court.
But I have a question.
And we're still friends.
But I have a question, which is, can you look at that if you wanted to say control and just say, just asylum cases from El Salvador, just from China, if you just
No,
wanted to
you
add?
can't. You can get it, but you can't look. You can't call up China.
Is that data you guys would have if you wanted?
It's there,
to do
yeah.
that?
It's there, and you could see the cases that Danna had, how many were from each nationality. But this, where we are now, we can't just call up by nationality. It's in
It might
here.
appear in the report if the court you're looking at has the high percentage of people from that nationality. And then you could find another court who also has a high percentage of
Is
cases.
that something TRAC will do if you have like a custom request like that?
Yes.
That you'd say, you know,
Yes, we'll charge you a little bit, but we do.
yes.
It's also available in the refugee roulette studies, country by country.
Now, we've been looking at immigration judges, and we're not going to go my time is up, I guess. But I want to go to one, come on.
Before you go, can you just do one quick spin through detention? Is that, we have time for that?
Yeah.
Through some of
Okay.
the detention numbers, because I think that's something that,
Okay, I wanted to do one quick spin through this. And this is, no data like this has ever existed before. This is looking at the sentencing by individual criminal judges. And you can look at Judge Burnham and see what time he gives for white-collar crime and how Judge Burnham compares with the other judges in Washington. And that is pretty interesting, but come on. No, Burnham. You can see why I get lost in here sometimes. I'm not supposed to, but I am. Here. So here are all the federal district court judges in the country, and all alphabetical, and I can do this by looking at it by district if I want to. But let's look at it by convictions, the number of convictions in a 5-year period. You see Judge Adams had 291 convictions in that 5-year period. If I go to the bottom, come on, go to the bottom, whoops.
You just went back.
But go to the top and then
On,
the next.
come here, you, I'm sorry.
You go drive.
Okay. Yeah, try it.
I want to go to the bottom of that list.
I think
No,
sorry.
no, no.
It's,
Just go up. Go back to the report. No, go up.
you do it, Steph.
Sorry. Custom reports. Yep. Now go down to the bottom here. So 290 hit convictions. There we go. Okay, go down to the bottom. 50 convictions for this judge. Go all the way down.
6,000.
Yeah, Judge Brack had 6,000 convictions in a 5-year period.
Where's Texas Tribune? Look at how
This
Texas
is,
is at the top.
what kind of cases is this?
Well, they're all in fact immigration cases in his district.
In the criminal?
Yeah, this is criminal.
Criminal immigration case.
Is this due process? Is this due process? And actually, if you took some time and looked at this, the top 20, the bottom 20 judges on this, all convicted more than 2,000 people. These cases are just going through like this. And as it's a life sentence, as Danna says, because of this conviction, you will then be deported by the immigration courts and you're gone forever. Did I hear a but?
Point of clarification, so we're talking about the aggravated felonies
No.
that are
This is
deportable?
all the cases that Judge Brack had, 85% of them are immigration cases of various kinds. They're classified as that.
So these would be people who entered without inspection or who re-entered after having been removed previously and are criminally prosecuted for that offense.
Which would make it an aggravated felony in terms of whether you can be
I'm
deported,
sorry.
but it's not,
Click on it.
but it's
yeah.
all,
These are just federal
it's all
district.
immigration related.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's the report on Judge Brack. And Judge Brack, sentencing. Get down here. Oh, Stephanie, you're going to be ashamed of me. And
No,
here,
pretty good.
and here are the kinds of cases that Judge Brack had. And as you can see, 89% of his cases, is that right? Yes, were immigration.
It looks like that he had much shorter sentences than everybody.
Oh, I mean, yeah, they're all short sentences. Because he's doing immigration, it's just convicting and, 30 days or 2 months or whatever, and all handled very, very quickly. If you look at that list, I think I didn't say, there are 20 judges at the top, all of whom handled more than 2,000 cases. And I would think it's a great national story to take those 20 judges and find out why hasn't the federal court system said, we ought to move 10 judges over to Judge Brack's district so that he can spend a little time thinking about it. This is not due process. Agreed?
Off the record?
Yeah, and, okay, and remember, due process, and this was not said yesterday, everyone is entitled to due process. It doesn't matter whether you're an illegal immigrant or a, old wasp from New England or whatever, you are entitled to due process. And this system here and the system in the immigration court and the way ICE, we haven't even gotten to what ICE does, shows due process is not here. Yes?
I noticed, Dave, that your top 20, Arizona, New Mexico,
Yeah.
South Texas,
Yeah.
all of them.
All of
were
them.
Arizona, New Mexico, South Texas.
Mm-hmm. That's
It's
the
because
war.
of our initiatives in the border states to try to pick up people quickly, process them, get a criminal conviction, and then remove them.
And of course, the public defenders are totally overwhelmed. I mean, it's a joke that they're there.
Again, off the record, I think it's called low-hanging fruit.
But isn't that where the, I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, isn't that where the fruit is, so to speak? I mean, aren't certain judges gonna be much more likely to have more convictions because they're in the
Okay,
area with
but
more cases?
say we decide we want to have the surge in criminal processing of immigration cases. If so, the courts have an obligation to provide it in a fair way. And when you have a handful of judges in the district handling, 4,000 cases, that is not happening. So the court has an obligation to deal with this problem and, as I say, move 10 judges over there.
There was a recent Ninth Circuit case that talked about whether or not group advisals were sufficient for people to really understand what their rights were. There's also the public policy implications in this where, like I said, you can generate the statistics saying we're doing great on criminal prosecutions, but it's like, are we prosecuting people for jaywalking or are we prosecuting people for rape, murder, and kidnapping? Those are where the details need to be teased out and the public needs to be advised to start the discussion about the policy choices.
And in TRAC,
That's, I
you
think,
can go in there and look at this on an individual judge or an individual district and see what's going on.
Just on
Are these misdemeanors and felonies, or are you just tracking?
Yes, well, they're all cases handled by district court judges or magistrate judges. So it's both misdemeanors and felonies.
And do the immigration cases, the convictions, do they tend to be, are they prosecuting them on felony offenses, or are these largely misdemeanors?
I think mostly felony.
Well, re-entry after, illegal entry is a misdemeanor. Re-entry after removal, prior removal is a felony. So it depends on what the facts are of the case.
There's a question over there?
I guess I had a question about due process. I'm happy to hear that they have the right to due process, but that was news to me. I was always under the impression that, behind that, once you go into immigration court, if you're not an American citizen, you're not entitled to.
No, a
Okay,
person is a person.
A person is a person.
This is not immigration court, this is
This
US
is-
federal criminal court, so they're being charged. And since no one who's a prosecutor from federal court is here to, I'm just gonna throw out one argument that I've heard made, which is that it is much more expedient to charge someone with an immigration violation than to charge them with drugs or murder or rape, etc., because it's a quick done and you're out of here. And so that while people it looks as if it's only an immigration charge, that often there are other charges that could have been filed or were initially filed but weren't prosecuted. That's the argument I've got.
So they have the right to a court-appointed attorney if they can't afford one and those sorts of things as well?
Yes, because it's a criminal proceeding.
Criminal.
Okay.
But not in immigration.
But
Not immigration.
if you're not in one of the border states, you have a public defenders are totally overwhelmed. I mean, I've talked to them. It's heartbreaking what they're doing. I mean, Danna has a hell of a charge with the number of people she's forced to deal with, the way the system does it. But the public defenders along the border are just. And by the way, because of the budget constraints, the number of public defenders is going down. So it's a very grim picture on a due process, equal justice under the law picture.
Can I ask, maybe a naive question? So if we were to look at people at the flip end, judges for whom the vast majority of the results were acquittals, would we say the same thing about them? Would we say that that was not equal justice? Would we say that people at both ends of the spectrum, would we presume that they were acting out of some political agenda, an expedient agenda, rather than equal justice and due process?
I got a little lost in that, but both ends of the scale probably means bad court administration. Judge Brack is put in a terrible position. And at the other end, there are judges who are not doing anything, and I mean, who are really sitting around for 5 years doing nothing. And these are full-time active judges. Why? Why aren't some of those people in Boston or whatever moved to Arizona? Well, you know that's not going to happen because of Senate, appointment rules and all of that. So it's a hard problem to solve, but I don't think the Administrative Office of the Courts and the Chief Justice of the United States has really dealt with this. And one reason they haven't dealt with it is they didn't have this data. They had never developed this data name by name. And by putting this out for public discussion, I hope that this will improve. We've got more stuff coming up on individual judges. I've gone on too long.
Let's switch over to
Yep, sorry.
Dianne is going to talk a little bit about
Sorry.
the stories that she does with you. Thank you so much, David. And with the iPad? No. You want the presentation to here?
The links.
Just the links? Okay. And one, Laura has been pushing me, show the detention data. There's a lot in TRAC that we can't cover today, and I don't want to open another bucket that then we'll all have context questions about. So let's...
And I want to whiz you through 4 stories that I've done that look at TRAC data, and I can show you how it was used very simply and in another way, in a very complicated way. I want to whiz you through because I'd like this to be very interactive, and I think you have a gazillion more questions for David, and it's so fabulous to have the judge here too to add on. I can't believe how lucky we all are.
Just give me a second.
And our collective mission here is to muscle up our journalism. And I think we're off to a fabulous start in doing that. And I'm going to talk again about how I've used TRAC data, but also how I've used and others have used other databases, such as the Department of Justice's EOIR site. And that's Judge Dana's bailiwick. You can really find a lot of good data there as well to get an understanding about how different nationalities, for example, are succeeding or not with their asylum requests, or to look at the rise of asylum requests by Mexicans.
There's something called the Statistical Yearbook that's published after the fiscal year, and it has many, many interesting appendix. The breakdown of cases by language, different countries of nationality,
Yeah.
lots of different things in their data tables.
What's it called again?
So the Statistical Yearbook for the Executive Office for Immigration Review, that's EOR, not Winnie the Pooh's pal, and that's a component of the Department of Justice. So you can go to the website. If you were just to Google EOIR Statistical Yearbook 2013, I don't know if 2013 is out yet, 2012, you will get a wealth of information.
How do I get it to go down? I'm having the same problem.
I'm glad someone else is
So
trouble fingers.
you're trying to
Make
scroll
it
up
go,
and down?
yeah, okay, let's
Just don't touch it too hard.
It's
Oh,
the new,
I see.
right, all the new
Oh,
apples have a touch
okay.
that's sensitive.
All right, okay. As I said, we're here to learn how to muscle up our journalism. And as storytellers, we look for good characters, memorable scenes, pithy dialogue, the stuff of cinema. And you can produce your journalism, your stories on immigration, by selecting really strong characters who carry the story. Going to immigration court, you're going to get incredible dialogue. Or you can do stories that just examine trends in the federal courts or in the immigration courts. And I'm going to start with a look at a story that I did in 2009 that looked at the surge in prosecutions of immigrants for criminal charges. And it's from 2009, and it was so interesting to look back at that and to hear what David was saying with his latest data on prosecutions. And I looked back then in 2009, and David and Sue Long were coming out with reports on the surge that started in Texas with something called Operation Streamline. We've got a link to that story that I think is on our website here at Harvard or is coming. And it's a very straightforward news story about the surge. It's got a lead that read, immigration prosecutions in the federal courts more than quadrupled during the 8 years of the Bush administration, and Texas's 2 border districts led the nation in the surge, according to a new report by a Syracuse University Research Center. And it's only intensified, as we heard. And if you walk away from this whole session being very confused about the different prosecutions that happen in the civil system and happen in the federal courts, I do hope that you do come away knowing about 2 charges, and you've heard their legal names mentioned here, 1325 and 1326. David has talked about the whole pie of the federal criminal court system and how half that pie is now divided into immigration prosecutions for criminal charges. The bulk of the criminal charges are 1325s and 1326s.
Under Title 8 of the United States Code.
Under Title 8 of the United States Code, and that's where they stuff most of the immigration charges, but not all of them, but most of them. So when you're talking to attorneys, you can sound like you sort of know your stuff when you talk about 1325s and 1326s. 1325s is a criminal misdemeanor. 1326 is the reentry without inspection. That's a felony, criminal felony. These aren't crimes that involve violence either. And so in this story from 2009, I looked at the TRAC data. They're coming out with these reports every month. I'm seeing how it's impacting Texas, obviously, because we have the biggest, fattest, widest border. And to storify it, I did probably 2 stories. One story, I talked to the federal public defender down in Laredo, and she was just overwhelmed, she said. It was so bad that she would meet, I think she was saying she'd meet her clients maybe a half hour before they were to go before the judge. She would take them into a hallway and just sit them in the benches. And that's where she was doing her interview. So imagine you're Mexican and you don't really speak English, and this young federal public defender just takes you to a chair to discuss your case, because it's becoming such a processing center that is like a meat factory almost, where you're cutting up beef and keeping it going and moving it on out. And I wondered, well, what would it be like to be a U.S. prosecutor? and you have a staff, you're my staff and you're all fantastic, and you want people to have really good experiences during murder prosecutions or doing drug violations or doing white-collar crime prosecutions in the back. And you have to do this legal triage because the government is telling you that we must prosecute immigrants criminally and crack down. And you do it, and now we're at a point where half of the 180,000 cases that go through our system deal with criminal prosecutions of immigrants to the extent that it's called crimmigration by folks in the trade, including the journos, right? And one of the things I did, again, is I talked to a U.S. prosecutor about what this was doing and what kind of legal triage he was doing. And he said, ever since 9/11, we've seen this greater increase on immigration, and he said the practical effect is to hurt our ability to prosecute white-collar fraud. It's difficult for the local district attorney's office to handle that. If we don't do them in the U.S. attorney's office, they just won't get done because it's so labor-intensive. And that story has come out in different academic reports because I think because the U.S. prosecutor was so frank. And then before I came, I asked one of the attorneys out at an advocacy agency, what are the biggest stories out there, the two biggest only, please, and where do you think journalists should muscle up? And what he said is that we should be looking more at crimmigration, at the prosecution of 1325s and 1326s, and the whole evolution of Operation Streamline. And so that's why I was so glad that David focused on that, and I pulled this old story. I used to live in Mexico, and I was a foreign correspondent there, and I'm so deeply troubled by all the violence, the narcotics violence that's swept through so many of the states that I love. And I thought that there must be a rise in asylum requests. So around 2009, I started looking at that with the data, and I didn't see much of a rise. I looked at the EOIR site and at TRAC, it just didn't see much of a rise. Nevertheless, I did a piece on a Mexican cop who was trying to get asylum through one of the 5 areas where you can prove fear of persecution. And he was trying to test what the judge called, evolving legal theory, breaking new ground with social group status, and arguing that that because of his work in the drug fight, he should be granted asylum, that he should get basically more points for what he was doing and what he had tried to do. He failed, and that's on appeal. Since I did that story, fast forward to this year, I looked at the case of a Mexican asylum request again, and it's now tripled. And one of the people I looked at with my colleague Alfredo Corchado is the case of this woman here. Let's see. How do I pull her? I think it's right here. Oh.
What are you trying to do?
Just pull it up. Just both fingers. Okay, there. Okay, just right there. There she is. This is a woman we identified by her nickname, which is Betty. She happens to be a beautiful woman. We're not showing her face for obvious reasons because she was fleeing the Zetas, and she was the common law wife of one of them, she said. And I got the story because I stay in contact with a lot of attorneys. I like attorneys. I wanted to be an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I think it shows, when I'm talking to attorneys.
And I called him up and I said, hey, Fernando, my colleague, Alfredo Corchado, he just happens to be in town right now. I was wondering if you had any interesting cases. And he said, oh, Dianne, yes, yes. You're never going to believe. This woman has come in and she's seeking asylum and she says she's running from the Zetas and I really believe her story. You should see her scars and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, well, any chance that she could meet us Saturday? And he said, well, I'll see. And sure enough, we met this woman on a Saturday, and I was astounded because she was such a wonderful storyteller, just a natural storyteller, so gifted, and she was so animated, and she would recall dialogue, and everything was very fresh. So writing the story was easy because she gave us so much material. And it was very heartbreaking. And I also think she'll probably fail. So the story was a vehicle to look at what we've seen with TRAC data and what we can also see at the the EOR site of the Department of Justice, and that is a rise in asylum applications by Mexicans, and this fact that Mexicans don't win most of the time. And I would really like to talk to the judge about why that is. But moving right along.
In this case,
her case hasn't gotten far enough before she's even gone before the immigration judge. She's really happy being in Dallas, the Dallas area. Her children have problems adjusting. And I think that they have great trauma. The boy saw a firefight that his father was in, and he acts out. He's very aggressive at the schoolyard. She showed me the counselor's letters to her. Another child has told her, why didn't you just kill our father? Why didn't you just kill him? And she said, well, you say that. And she said, so we could live like a family. Just really gripping backstory here, and I think that the mental health issues and the trauma of immigrants, and particularly and especially refugees, is one of the great underreported stories.
How did she get across the border?
Oh, it's a great story. It's in the story. She came across, and she I think at Laredo, and they caught her right away. She had 3 kids, right? She had 3 kids, and the little girl, the youngest, was just tired, and she said, I'm fleeing Mexico. I'm fleeing the violence, and they said, yeah, right, aren't you all? And one of the children cried out, but they're going to kill us. They're going to kill us. And I think the kid had a meltdown. And that's when the immigration officer said, okay, this is believable. And because of that, he helped her. And it was an ICE agent, and that ICE agent ended up actually taking them all to the HEB, big grocery store, and bought them food, and I think gave her a $20 bill. It's a really interesting story. She was giving me all this delicious detail that made the story cinematic. And I really think it could have a movie treatment. The next...
Diane?
Mm-hmm.
How long will she wait before she gets a decision? What did you say, 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah, it really can vary, but it sounds like if she immediately explained at the border what she wanted, she's gonna be referred to Citizenship and Immigration Services for an interview with an asylum officer, a credible fear interview, for them to decide whether she should then be allowed to come in and be placed in proceedings to apply for asylum. And then, I don't know exactly what the backlogs are in Dallas, but if it were in San Francisco, it would take about a year for her case to come on the first arraignment type calendar, and then another 3 to 4 years to get on the docket where we give her half a day or a full day, whatever time she needs to present all the story. So it's a 4 to 5 year process.
So what happens to her kids in the meantime?
The kids are with her. I mean, I would assume there does seem to be an improvement in terms of DHS choosing not to keep families in detention. So she was released.
She was released.
On her own recognizance, I would assume.
Yeah. Another story that and I have the link up at our site, it came from the New Yorker, and it was written by the fabulous William Finnegan. And it's the tale of a U.S. citizen who was deported. A U.S. citizen deported. Because the dragnet of deportations is now so big, there are U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents who have gotten caught up in detention or even been deported. In this case, he had mental problems.
Diane, I think you have the wrong one up. You're talking about Mark
I
Little.
know,
Is
I
that
can't
correct?
find it. I can't find
okay.
it.
That's the story of Mark Little, Lyttle.
It's just I think it's a
Yes, there it is.
There he is. There's Mark Little.
Of course.
That's good. That's good.
Is the data story though?
When did that run?
In an interesting way.
So tell us about the data in the
Stephanie
story.
just said that's a data story. It's a fabulous narrative about the Kafka land that this man went through when he, as a U.S. citizen, is deported. And within the story, fairly early on, as Finnegan is building up the punch after punch after punch that he went through, he throws in a little gem that he got from TRAC off the website. And on top of all the complications of the story, he sent to the Stewart Detention Center in a place called Lumpkin, Georgia. And it's, I believe it's the largest detention center, probably as measured by beds. And he just throws in there the likelihood that he will be removed because he went to TRAC and found that little piece of data. And it's just one sentence in the story, and it builds the tension of the piece. And the detention removal rate is 83%. And again, I really recommend the story just so you can get an idea of all the legal complications that can happen with immigration. Another big trend in immigration reporting is something called prosecutorial discretion. And there have been a series of memos in the Obama administration under the within ICE that said, hey, we have something called prosecutorial discretion, and you should ease up on the deportation of certain kinds of people. We call them low-risk people, non-priority people. And I'd written a few stories about that, and I was, you know, you're always trying to change the camera lens and tell stories from different viewpoints, and I tend to get a lot of Mexicans in my stories for obvious reasons of where I'm based. So I thought, I gotta tell this story in a fresh way. There was another prosecutorial memo that came out impacting how ICE and others were to treat children, and my editor was ordering up this story. So I thought, oh God, I have to really do a good job on this because she wants it, and this is great that she does. And I was talking to an attorney and law professor in Houston, and about the significance of this latest memo on prosecutorial discretion when he told me about the case of John Lennon and how John Lennon, oh yes, the musician, yes, him, played this pivotal role in the development of prosecutorial discretion. And had a very good attorney, no surprise, from New York named Leon Wilds. So I built my story on the latest memo around John Lennon, you know, getting a strong character that people could relate to, and hoping that I could pull in more readers because it was about the famous musician, the famous Beatle. And it goes into prosecutorial discretion. Within that story, I dropped in TRAC data. I'm again having problems with this. Within this story, there is some TRAC data that looks at how well prosecutorial discretion has gone as measured by the immigration court backlog. One of the memos said there should be prosecutorial discretion placed on cases in the immigration court backlog. TRAC came along and started measuring that. And what it showed is that less than 10%, maybe less than 8% of cases result in people getting prosecutorial discretion. It's not the only place in this big, vast system that you can get prosecutorial discretion, but it's one place where we as journalists can measure it. So,
Dan, can you explain what you mean about how they get the 8%, or David, if you want to step in?
I'm sorry, were you asking me?
I was asking David just to track,
I'm trying to think. I'm sorry.
I would think you're taking the existing immigration court caseload and looking at how many cases get a code for completion that they've had prosecutorial discretion exercised. There is also the other component of prosecutorial discretion, which would be before referring the case to the immigration court, do you exercise your prosecutorial discretion to not issue the charging document and start the whole process? We've not seen any overwhelming evidence that that's different from what we're seeing in terms of the cases that are already in court, as you can see from the overall surge in pending caseload.
And another part of the prosecutorial discretion problem is ICE is over and over again saying we are going to concentrate on serious criminals, and the others are going to be put aside. And our data, which we put up recently, shows that, and I think I went to this, didn't I, in my session, shows that 85% are not criminals, have no convictions. So the statement of ICE, it just isn't true. So there's various levels where this prosecutorial discretion can be looked at, and it's not a serious policy. It's a good talking point for the Obama administration.
yeah. The reason that we have this photo rather than one of John Lennon is because the two women in the middle are in the story, and it's a mother and a daughter. They're both, the daughter now has DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The mother is undocumented, and the father was deported. And he's back in southern Mexico, and when the daughter, she's really super duper sharp. She's an activist in United We Dream. She's been trained by someone here at Harvard, who's a friend of the Neiman program, to leverage the power of her story and her narrative. And so when she saw this latest prosecutorial memo on children and the separation of families, she dove into its 9 pages to see if it would apply to her situation with her father, and it didn't. So she's within the story, deeper in the story. But I didn't want to, again, lead with her because I have so many Mexican characters in my story, and I thought leading with John Lennon was so delicious. And there's actually a wonderful, wonderful YouTube video up where you can hear him talking with his attorney about his case. It's very funny.
Can you clarify the 8%? Is it 8% of people who, I've lost what that was referring to.
Can't remember if it's 8% or...
Of the pending immigration court caseload, during the time that prosecutorial discretion has been implemented, only approximately 8 to 10%, I don't remember the exact figures, of the pending caseload were resolved by prosecutorial discretion, being exercised in those cases going off the docket.
Yeah.
The rest were just convictions.
No, the rest remain in immigration removal proceedings to determine whether or not they're gonna qualify for any status, but they're not taken out of the system, which is what prosecutorial discretion would do. Prosecutorial discretion would be declined to prosecute.
And
That's what that
Doesn't
means.
it make more sense though that what you said would be going on, that they would not, those cases wouldn't be brought in the first place if prosecutorial discretion is being properly used?
Well, both things need to happen because we have 344,000 pending cases, right? So you should look at the cases that are already with the court as well as the cases coming in. And we've seen only the 8 to 10% reduction in cases pending before the court that are, closed because of that. And it's more difficult to measure. What you're saying is how about the metering of cases coming in? But that's where the data would suggest that there hasn't been a particular significant change in that. Or why would our caseload be continuing to grow at such a rapid rate? And again, in the TRAC data, our calculations as to how many new cases are begun in a given time frame.
And I just want to make one more point. I double-checked the TRAC data, of course, and I went to ICE and I asked them for the issuance of prosecutorial discretion on the specific universe of backlog in the immigration courts, and they gave me the same percentage figure. What was different is that they gave me a bigger universe of backlog cases, more like 400,000, I think, if I remember correctly. But it was the same percentage, I thought. They also gave me the data, what I wanted, my response to my question after the story ran.
So I would like to take it to a little bit of discussion because I thought it'd be interesting if you can tell us a little bit about how do you find your stories? Do you just go through TRAC and sort of look for things, or,
Thank you. This particular story, I don't like going to protest. They're staged, they're choreographed, but I meet people. They see me out there. And this was a demonstration in front of Texas Senator John Cornyn's office, and it was a miserable day. It's wet, there was a mist, it was misty. And I actually wanted to do a piece on the two women in the center of the photo. So, and I haven't done it yet. But I developed a rapport with her. I'm really impressed with her. And so it was easy to go back to her. And she's out in public. Her name's Grisa Martinez. And so it was easy to go back to her. That was one way. In 2006, we had immigration protests erupting all over the country. And it started in Dallas with students walking out of their classrooms because of a proposal by Sensenbrenner that would have criminalized illegal, unlawful presence, I believe. And that's different than unlawful entry. There's illegal entry, there's unlawful presence, and so students started walking out. I met her then, and I met her because I think I went to an advocacy agency and I asked for who might be good to talk to. And she's in a mixed status family. I found that really interesting. I profiled an undocumented student who got on the system, the sound system at the high school at the request of his principal to try and talk to the other students about not walking out, about the importance of getting an education no matter what. And he was sort of the flip side of the story of students walking out. And I thought that was really an interesting piece. And I heard about him shortly after that happened, and I heard that he was Harvard bound. And so I profiled him. I followed him for 5 years. And he finally came out about being undocumented. He's now getting his master's in the divinity school, and his name is Pierre Berenstein. He's a real impressive guy. And I just, I would have lunch with him. I would send him emails every now and then, stay in touch with him. I just found him fascinating. He's deeply committed to social justice issues and to domestic violence. And that's what he wants to be remembered by, not by being the poster kid for the undocumented population.
But I think all reporters know a straight stat story often doesn't take you very far. I mean, sometimes it can really, you have some incredible figure, but having some real people in it, and whether you begin meeting a real person, then going and getting stats about her condition, or whether you see a terrible situation and you go out and look for someone, it's a sort of back and forth.
Yeah, I go to also fiestas, like there's one coming up in Dallas. The folks from Michoacan are going to have a big fiesta. I'm going to go to that. I'm very interested in, I'm not sure what I'm interested in. There's a lot of violence in Michoacan. I can't believe they're having a fiesta. It has a really beautiful culture. I might do a quick hit, the things that are happening there are just terrible. People being killed and strung up in public thoroughfares, so to send messages and I just saw one of these photos, and I'll spare you the details. It was very bad, and I go to things like that. As I said, I keep in good contact with lawyers. I get a kick out of immigration lawyers. They're a different breed. There's just such a different breed. AILA's a great organization, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Years ago, I went to AILA, an AILA convention, and I met a young man named Stephen Yale Lair, who he was a youngster too. I was a youngster, he was a youngster. And we talk often. I so trust him. Our relationship goes back a lot of years. And I'm looking at Sandra, she did a book with him.
He's now a law professor, and he was a former editor of a technical journal, I think is the best way of describing it. One of the first updates years ago that was like a mandatory subscription before the internet days of what cases and trends were happening in immigration law.
Yeah, and you have people who
And there are local chapters of the American Immigration
yeah.
Lawyers Association, so you don't even have to do it. It's the largest bar association of immigration lawyers in the country, AILA, American Immigration Lawyers Association. And they have their local chapters, so you can network with those folks. National Immigration Project, the Detention Watch Network.
Detention Watch Network is excellent. They're really on top of things. And as journalists, we're just got a radar up for being used by advocacy groups and this and that. But Detention Watch is just really, really good. They're looking at the criminal issues involved. They were looking at criminal issues before anybody else was, I think. Andrea Black is the head of that, and she's great.
So before we close up the session, how many of you know about PEW data and how to access it? That's good, right? So we don't need to spend a lot of time on PEW.
Just very quickly, they're fabulous. They're very, very, very user-friendly. It was started, the PEW project, the PEW Hispanic Center has since changed its name. It was started by Roberto Zurdo, who is part of our tribe, former journalist, last at the Washington Post. And he's very, very careful in trying to stay neutral. They don't make policy recommendations. He's not there anymore, but they still carry that ethic. And you find wonderful data there. There's a link that says data and resources that's quite good. Their demographic guru is Jeff Pasal, who came out of the U.S. Census Bureau. He's very, very careful. And I think he pioneered a way of estimating what they call the unauthorized population in the U.S., the undocumented population or illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, choose your word, and it's something called the residual method, I believe. It's what's now used by DHS. So his numbers or Pew's numbers will match generally what DHS comes up with, and you find DHS's numbers by just Googling the statistical yearbook, DHS statistical yearbook. Don't try and go to the website and find it, just Google it.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Dianne. We're gonna, oh, you got a question?
I actually had a housekeeping question
Yes.
about TRAC. I
Yes.
wanted to know, how much does it cost, and what's like the most efficient, cost-effective way of getting it for our newsrooms, for example?
If you go to TRAC Fed, you'll see a thing, fees, and you click on fees at the bottom of the page, and it'll give you a breakdown. It is based on different size of the paper. And small paper now, it costs, an annual subscription for everybody in the newspaper is $720 annual. But there's, I think it goes up, the New York Times pays more than that. But on the public site, trac.syr.edu, it really is free, and there's an awful lot of stuff there that will be helpful. But I've got a handful of cards left, and call me up and talk about that.
Thanks.
Can I ask David one quick question?
One quick question, the famous reporter line. Hey, I got one quick question.
Well, maybe it's not so quick.
Go ahead.
You've had so much success with the FO, filing FOIA requests. And we've had a lot of difficulty getting data from ICE and from Border Patrol. Either our requests are either denied or it takes years for them to respond. And I'm wondering if you just have any quick tips on.
Well, your assumption is wrong. We've had terrible time with ICE. We do not get data. They've stiffed us and stiffed us and stiffed us. They provide a little slice of 1 month, and then next time we put in monthly requests for this data. And it's very hard to build trends. And we started the suit, and we're pushing them, and they have been very unhelpful. And I think the people in the FOIA are, criminally, their actions are really criminally wrong. If you look at the statute, they are not obeying the law. It's shocking. So it's hard.
I was hoping you were going to give me a good tip.
Thank you so much, guys.